Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to invite Dr. Baranwal to speak with us. Dr. Baranwal, if you will activate your video, please join us. And we're looking forward to having the conversation today. This is the first of a series of web chats that we will be having with important leaders from around the world to talk about, well, not just nuclear issues, but really issues of leadership and issues of building personnel resources for the future. And it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Baranwal here today to talk because she has such an interesting background, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Dr. Baranwal is the Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy for the U.S. Department of Energy. And as such, she's in charge of the entire civilian nuclear research and development portfolio for nuclear energy for the United States. And as such, is a great partner to the NEA. So with that, let me start us off, Rita, by just inviting you to tell us about yourself. How did you get involved in nuclear, and why? And really, as you talk, why nuclear? Why nuclear as opposed to something else?
So thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you on this chat. I very much appreciate you joining and spending some time with us. I hope you're all doing well during these very, very unusual times and circumstances, and please continue to stay safe, and hopefully we can see each other in person soon. A little bit about my background and how I ended up in nuclear and why nuclear. There's a theme, I think, throughout my career, and a lot of things happened by keeping an open mind. When I started out towards the end of my high school career, I wanted to pursue fashion design. And I ended up actually at a college where they offered tours of departments, and I was also interested in engineering. And I got to tour their material science and engineering department. And as soon as I saw the scanning electron microscope that the students got to use, I fell in love. And I said, I have to do something that lets me use that machine. And so I ended up majoring in material science and engineering. I ended up then going on to graduate school in the same discipline, got my PhD in material science and engineering. And then it came time for me to apply for jobs. It turns out that the rejections that I received from a couple companies were very much serendipitous. The job offers that I did get, only one of them was in nuclear. The other was in the airline industry. The other was in the semiconductor industry. And another one was in materials, and specifically in composites. My first interview that was in the nuclear industry was at Bettis Atomic Power Laboratory, and that's just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, here in the United States. And this was just around the time when the internet was starting to become pretty popular. There were several different web browsers out there, and I did what all of us are trained to do before an interview: do some homework, know what questions you want to ask, and be prepared. And so I started to do a search on Bettis Atomic Power Laboratory, and I could find nothing. And that made me anxious, but I arrived to the interview, and in one of the most memorable moments of my working career, I walked into their human resources department and said, I apologize. I have no idea what you do. And if we don't pursue and proceed with this interview, that's fine with me, but I'm not prepared. And they said, oh no, that's good. You're not supposed to know what we do. And what they do is design, develop, and maintain nuclear reactors for the United States Navy, for aircraft carriers and submarines. And so I proceeded with the interview, and true to form, when they showed me their materials laboratory with not only their scanning electron microscopes, but their transmission electron microscopes, I knew that was the place for me. I ended up taking that job offer and worked there for almost 10 years. Along the way, we had a joint project with NASA to develop a reactor that would go to Jupiter to explore its icy moons. And during that time, I for some reason assumed that my boss knew that is something I wanted to work on. And something inside me said I should let him know. And so I sent him a note saying, if you're taking candidates to work on this joint NASA project, I'm very interested. And he came back to me and he said, I had no idea that you were interested, and I never would have thought to select you for the team. So my message to many of you is never assume that those around us know our intentions. And if there is something that you would like or want to be a part of, please speak up. And so I did get to be part of that team. And the folks that I worked with saw something in me and tapped me to be a manager for part of the project as we were actually, unfortunately, closing it out. So that was my first exposure to management. And I said, I remember very distinctly saying to my boss at the time, I said, I have a PhD in materials engineering. I want to do research. I don't want to go into management. And he said, just try this. I think you can, you can handle it. I think you have good skills for it. Just try it. And if you don't like it, you can step back out of the role. Well, here I am, almost, over 10 years later. So I did enjoy it. So my other message would be, when others see something in you, recognize that they see something in you, they have some faith in you to leverage a particular skill that you may not necessarily recognize in yourself. Take advantage of that opportunity, because those do not come along very often. Fast forward a bit, I ended up moving to a different company, Westinghouse, and worked at their fuel fabrication facility in South Carolina here in the United States, as well as their headquarters back in Pennsylvania. Another opportunity came along where, while I was in South Carolina, my boss-to-be calls me and he says, this is a secret phone call. I want you to interview for this director position, which would have been a promotion, director of core engineering. And I said, I'm not a nuclear engineer. I don't know what core engineering is. And he said, that's exactly why I want you, because you will bring a different perspective. And I've seen your leadership skills and I know you can do the job. So come and at least interview. So again, there's that someone who sees something in you, take advantage of it. I went for the interview, got the job, ended up managing others who had also applied for the job. So that was a bit of a lesson for me as well. And then I translated into being director of research and development for the company. And that was a very exciting position because we worked on game-changing technologies that would revolutionize this industry. And they are starting to do that, including things like accident-tolerant fuel and 3D printed reactor components. Then from there, I decided that I needed to change. And that's another message that I'd like to share with you, is that it's okay to recognize that you need to do something different. Have some sort of a plan for what you want to do next. But it's not an indication of failure if you choose to pursue something and then you start to pivot and go on to something else. It's okay to experiment. I then went on to Idaho National Lab here in the United States, worked there for 3 years as the director of Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. And in that job, I developed relationships with many different industry partners who were working in the nuclear industry. And we impacted in that initiative, the GAIN initiative, we impacted over 120 different companies and entities. And I think through that role and having those relationships, my name, I believe, was, through that those interactions, was put forth as a candidate for the role that I'm currently in, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy for the United States Department of Energy. And so that's kind of a long route to how I got here, but it was certainly not the plan that I had when I was 17. Why do I stay here in this industry is a curious story as well. So when I was at Bettis, my first job out of grad school, I had the privilege of taking a van full of summer interns to Newport News shipyard. And at the time, they were building the Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier. And I had the opportunity to stand inside where the reactor would go, so inside the cavity of the reactor compartment. And as I looked up, I realized that what I was working on, which is was nuclear fuel when I was at Bettis, was going to power this massive behemoth of a ship to help defend my country. And that to me was a monumental moment. Now you fast forward to today, and I now have 2 teenage children, and I want them to grow up in a world that is cleaner than what we have today. And nuclear energy certainly provides the product that will contribute to that clean energy environment in that clean energy world. And so in a nutshell, I started in this industry because of the energy density, and I stay for the clean energy.
Well, that's a great story, and of course, it makes me sad to think about all the wonderful fashion designs we're missing because you took this path.
I think everyone's for the better.
Well, something you said as you went through your discussion that is very interesting is there seems to be 2 aspects of your career progression. One is bringing different perspective to things as you went, but also you mentioned several times that somebody saw something in you. And that's really an interesting aspect of anyone's career. It isn't just you; it's also other people and how you interact with them. What do you think it was that they saw? Why you? What was it they saw in Rita that stood out?
So when I was young, I must have been in 8th grade. Up until then, I was pretty quiet, and I had a teacher, and I remember her very vividly. And she called my parents for a parent-teacher conference, out of cycle, not the usual annual parent-teacher conference. This was startling to me. I didn't know what she was going to talk about. I couldn't think that it was something awful, but it wasn't probably something positive either. And what she said to them was, Rita's great, she's doing well in the class, it's fine, but she's so quiet and she doesn't participate enough and she should participate more. And I grew up in a typical Asian American household, and we came home after the conference, and my parents said, you heard what she said, you need to participate more, and that's the way it's going to be. And so I started to speak up more and more, and that has certainly, that conference has served me well, because I tend to be, I speak my mind with some, I use filters as well, but I don't just speak out of turn, certainly. But I operate by, if I'm in a meeting, I'm there for a reason. I should participate. I should be there on purpose. And I think that aspect of my personality has served me well and has been recognized by those that have been around me, that we need somebody like that for whatever reason on this particular team, or for this particular project. We're doing things differently. And that's a lot of the theme throughout my career as well, is doing things differently, where we don't know what the outcome's going to be. There's not a checklist for research and development. There's not a clean process. And so being able to offer up different perspectives and different ideas, and having the willingness to do so, I think has served me well.
And do you think that bringing different perspective, that's a really interesting piece of this as well? Because one might say that a criticism of the nuclear sector over the years is that it's been a bit insular, that that it talks to itself a lot. Coming while you're not exactly an outsider in the nuclear field, but you're a material scientist. You came from the Bettis Labs, which isn't nuclear energy in the commercial sense. It's a different discipline. Do you see that? Do you see that there is a bit of an insularity sometimes in the nuclear sector, that when you bring a different perspective and look at things a different way? Do you think that's something that's necessary in this field? Is this something that you need to do in the future?
Absolutely. I think it's necessary in this field. I think it's necessary in many fields. I'm reading a book right now called Range, and it talks about how not necessarily specializing, but being more of a generalist offers all of these different benefits, not only in life, but in your careers and in your personal lives as well. And it talks about all of these studies that have been done where there's groups of experts who know what they're doing and they've done it time and time again. And what the outcome is of those types of projects versus you have some experts in a group, but then you have others from outside that sphere. So for example, in our world, somebody from outside the nuclear engineering field come in and offer a different perspective and make it analogous to an experience that they've had in their life. And those projects are always more successful. And so I think drawing that back to your question, absolutely, we need that diversity of thought and experience to at least give us the opportunity to look at things differently and perhaps pursue a different outcome. I'm very proud that I have had the opportunity to work with art majors during my career, finance majors, you know, certainly the scientific background, science, technology, engineering, math, physics. But those other what you would think of as a non-typical pursuit have been very beneficial to us in this industry.
Well, something is also in your background. You mentioned your leadership of the GAIN program, which brought industry into the laboratories in a new way. But it also brought in different types of industry, different types of companies started to become interested in nuclear during that period. And that's really kind of a hallmark of what I see happening in the nuclear sector these days. These outside thinkers, you know, a lot of these billionaires who made a lot of money in Silicon Valley or in aerospace or something, making these investments in nuclear. It's a real change in the industry. And what you're doing at the Office of Nuclear Energy today fosters that and creates an environment to try to emphasize that. Do you think that's really the path to the future, to get away from what we used to do, which was a very nuclear-centric thought process, and now broadening, looking at these other sectors and incorporating lessons learned from others? Do you think that's really the path to the future?
I think it should be, absolutely, because again, we all come with a different set of experiences to a project, to an office, and it's a shame that we don't leverage everyone's experience to benefit you know, a new project. So for example, very specifically for GAIN, we wanted to also include supply chain vendors in our conversations with new technology developers, because we wanted to apply the lessons learned from the recent new reactor builds in the country and say, well, you know, you can't just design something and then hand it off to somebody that we're going to ask to construct this. It would actually be better if those constructors, the supply chain folks, were involved with us while we're doing the design phase. And so that is something that we started to encourage while I was with GAIN. And then you start to also then get these different ideas. Well, you know what? You know, 30 years ago, we only had subtractive manufacturing where you take material away from, for example, a sheet of metal. Now we have all of these advanced manufacturing techniques, including 3D printing, where you can now design any sort of component. And so supply chain vendors would come in and say, tell us what the purpose is of this widget, and we'll tell you how we can make it. Don't prescribe to us how we can make it, which is sort of the old way of thinking. So it's been certainly serendipitous to have all of the different key players involved from phase one, from the design phase, as we progress down this route.
Would you say you're more optimistic about the future of nuclear now, or less optimistic than you were, say, when you started your career?
I'm much more optimistic now. We have so many more advances in technology, in robotics, in sensing, in materials, in computing. We have a world of different avenues that we can start to leverage and explore. And I use the word exploit in a good way. Exploit these technologies so that we can improve the technology that we offer in our sector. Not only that, we are a technology that has always been emissions free. And now is the time for us to brag about that, to flaunt it, and to talk about the benefits. We're reliable, right? We're emissions free. In the United States, nuclear energy is responsible for 55% of this country's clean energy. Meanwhile, we're only generating 20% of the country's electricity. So that's a really big payoff. And so to start talking about that in the context of countries across, around the world, and states within the United States that are trying to decarbonize. They either they have aspirations to decarbonize, or they have mandates from their governments to decarbonize. We in the nuclear energy sector have a product that can help. And I'm not advocating that every country or state has to have a 100% nuclear portfolio, but nuclear certainly has to be part of that portfolio if the goal is to reduce carbon emissions.
Well, at the Office of Nuclear Energy, I think you're in a position to help that along, aren't you?
I am, and I actually have some good news to announce today, if I may.
Please.
Okay, I have a few points here, so I'm gonna read from it. But the exciting news, and it relates to United States advanced reactor technologies. Last month, our president's nuclear fuel working group released its report, The Strategy to Restore American Nuclear Energy, and that lays out policy options to restore America's leadership in nuclear energy and technology. The report recommends continued support for the demonstration of U.S. advanced nuclear technology. My office has taken action on that by launching the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, and the acronym is ARDP. This program focuses DOE and non-federal sources on the actual construction of advanced demonstration reactors that are affordable to build and operate. Through cost-shared partnerships with industry, the ARDP will provide $160 million US in initial funding to build 2 reactors that can be operational within the next 5 to 7 years. This program is going to require a sustained technical and financial commitment to achieve these very aggressive goals. And we have been moving very quickly to execute this new program. It's been a bit of a challenge while we're all working from home and teleworking, but we've gotten a lot accomplished. So today, I'm very excited to announce that the ARDP funding opportunity announcement will officially open for applications starting today. The window to apply will be open for 90 calendar days and will close on Friday, August 14th, 2020. The department will hold a virtual industry day on or about June 3rd, 2020, for interested applicants to interact with the department on the FOA. And a website with more information about the FOA will be included in our social media announcements. Ultimately, our goal is to make these awards by the end of this calendar year. And I should note that nuclear energy has a strong support in the United States, and we will work across the US government and industry to advance the report's recommendations. So this is really exciting news because we have bilateral support from Congress in the United States to further pursue nuclear technology advancement. And $160 million is a substantial amount of funding for at least 2 teams to start to demonstrate their technologies. What we're hoping for, to your earlier question, is that we're going to have not a singular company, but a team of entities. So you've got perhaps a developer, an end user, some supply chain companies as well, perhaps involved in these types of proposals. So it's a very exciting time.
That is very exciting. Well, congratulations on getting that launched, and we're looking forward to seeing the end result, which it sounds like would be actually breaking ground on construction projects.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, thank you for announcing it here. If we were a newspaper, we'd be in really good shape now, right? Maybe we should go
thank you for the platform.
We beat 60 Minutes. So let's talk about you a little bit more, because because we're starting to get some questions in it, and one of the interesting questions that someone asked about you is, it seems like you've had this sort of star-struck career where things just kind of went your way, but no one's career is really like that. So what were the bad times? What were the challenges, and what did you have to do to overcome them?
So let's start with, I mentioned that I didn't get some jobs. I was devastated when I did not get a job from a company that I thought I would want to spend the rest of my career at. And I viewed that as a failure at the time. And I thought, well, what did I do wrong? And I had to give a presentation on my research, and it was to a room full of men, I remember, who were very, very smart. And they asked questions, and then they started going off on a tangent on research that wasn't mine, but was being done in my group. And I didn't have all the answers, and evidently didn't answer enough to satisfy what the question was. And so I didn't get the offer there. And I was devastated, but it turns out it all worked out. I got the offer at Bettis and ended up, as we talked about already here. So there's that. I think some of the most challenging times that I have had, there have been a few times in my life where I have been called into meetings with my senior leadership where I thought I was going to be fired. So I actually took my car keys with me to those meetings. And the debate that was going on that precipitated those meetings was that my technical integrity was being questioned. And I said, you're asking me to sign off on a document, for example, and I won't do it because of these reasons. And so I was willing to be fired, but maintain my technical integrity. And those were very challenging times, sleepless nights, tears. I remember exactly where I was when I got certain phone calls. And so the first time was as a manager. And before anyone asked, I never got fired. So it all worked out. But that was almost the sacrifice that I was willing to make versus, giving in on the requests that were being made of me. I explained my position and why I was acting the way I was and why I wouldn't do certain things. And that also was respected. The second instance was when I was a director. So I had a few hundred people that I was managing. And it was a very similar situation. And so again, I was called in and was explained from a different perspective. This is how you have to look at it. You have to look at it with the customer's viewpoint, or walk in their shoes for a little bit, and also understand what the implications are of what you're trying to do. And so again, I did not get fired, but I was taught to appreciate different viewpoints. And while it was perhaps good for me to be stubborn in my viewpoint, to understand that there is another side to it. In that instance, what was important, that it also demonstrated to my team that I had their back. And I never really appreciated that I needed to demonstrate that or say that. To me, if somebody is leading me, I assume they have my back, but that's not necessarily always the case. And so that was another, from every supposed failure, I've learned a lot of things, and it has not been a starstruck journey by any means. I think what we see outwardly facing is only the good stuff. But some of the biggest risks I've taken have been moving my family across country when my children were little. Taking jobs on that I have no idea of the content, for example, that core engineering director job, and even this position, right? There was a lot of unknown. While I had very good coaching from folks who have been in the role before me, yourself included, it was a very big leap. Again, I'm a very technical person, not a political person. I'm learning a lot in this role about that piece of it, but it was a risk, and so far I have not regretted any of the risks that I've taken. And so that's what I would encourage folks. Your situation may be different, but we need to, going back to the experimental days that I had, working in labs, testing and experimenting and learning have suited me well.
So you mentioned that you did reach out to people when you were making decisions and when you were going through hard times. So is there a mentor or mentors that you were able to draw on over the years to bounce ideas off of, or to get advice? Were there people like that you had during your career progression?
There weren't many, and so that absence has been a bit painful. And so what I've learned from that is that me being, for example, female, being in a technical field, being of Indian descent, all of those things are really important to show to others, importantly younger students, that there are people that look like you that can do this kind of job. And it pains me that I didn't have a strong mentorship relationship as I went through my career. But now I'm in this role, and so I can change that kind of that model and be there for those that do wish to have that type of mentor.
I think I've mentioned to you, we do these international mentoring workshops, which we've talked about. And one of the messages we get back from those all the time from high school girls is they really want role models. That's something that really is important to them. And since you raised the issue of being a woman, you know, one thing when you're appointed that it struck me as quite interesting in two different ways was that I don't remember a lot of discussion about you being the first woman in that job. I don't remember people making a big deal about it. So on one hand, I thought, well, that shows how far we progressed. It isn't remarkable anymore that a woman gets a job like this. But you are the first. You're the first woman in that seat. But then I thought, well, it's now been how many years since that job has existed, and why did it take so long to get a woman in that job? So it's both a good and a bad aspect of that. And so sort of as the first woman to be in this position, how do you see the state of women in the nuclear field? Do you think this is how do you feel about it? Are we in a good place? Are we in a bad place? How do you view it?
I think there's room for improvement, but we're getting there. I think within our own little circle, it may be comfortable, but when you start to look from the outside in, there's still a huge disparity between the numbers and the opportunities that we get. And let me harken back to something that I had to go through as a manager of people. We were reviewing annual performance reviews. And I looked and I said, well, these two folks graduated from the same college. They had the same job title. They do the same type of work, had the same GPA types of GPAs coming out of school. Why does she make less than he does? And there was no real explanation. I said, well, we need to fix this. And so almost everything was equal. So I'm not going to, I understand that there are scenarios where things may not be equivalent, if you will, but in this case it was. And I said, I want to fix this. And I realized that was a job of somebody like me who was in that role to fix things like that when we see something that needs attention. And so it was not easy to do. I've even been told, well, so-and-so has been gone on maternity leave, so they should not be considered for a promotion. And I thought, well, no, that's not the case, and let's fix that as well. So there's a lot of attitude adjustment, a lot of behaviors that need to change. And I think that'll start to happen when people speak from experience. And it's not just women. What's very interesting to me, very early on, I had one high-level manager, and he treated me one way, and then all of a sudden his own daughter had a child, and he realized, like, it's really hard for her to go to work and manage childcare and things like that. I said, now you understand what I go through and what others like me go through. And it almost was immediate how his attitude towards mothers who were working for him changed for the better. And so I think, I think folks are experiencing different things in their personal lives, and it's fortunately in a good way translating to the workplace. There's still work to be done. I'm not going to say it's certainly far from perfect, but I'm optimistic that with more open-mindedness and people speaking up, it'll get better.
I mean, do you think the barriers are mostly mindset, or do you think they're also systemic issues? You mentioned childcare, for example. Do you think things like that are really where the barriers happen? Or do you think it really is just the way people are thinking and the lack of understanding?
It might be a bit of both. When I have spoken to, for example, groups of women that are in this field, um, I tell them, again, show up on purpose. If you're in a meeting, participate. And I actually do that to my staff. When they're in a meeting, I'll call on them, including the folks that schedule my meetings. If you're in a meeting, I want to know if there's something that you have to share with the group. And if a meeting is not worth your time and you don't really want to participate and you have the ability to not go, then don't go, right? Our time is very valuable, no matter what position we're in, if you're a student all the way up to a CEO. And so choose your meetings wisely, choose what you plan to participate in wisely, and show up on purpose. But I do think that there is room for us to continue to grow.
Well, one last question along these lines from me, and then maybe we'll start to migrate towards more of the audience questions. Why is it important? Why should people care about this?
About diversity,
about
or
the gender diversity. Why is it important?
So let me share some of my personal experiences, especially during this time that we're in, where there's a lot of none of us have been through a pandemic, I believe, and we're in very uncertain times, and it's unpredictable, and we're in a scientific industry where we need data, we want information, we want deadlines, and I can't even tell my team when we're coming back to the office full scale. But to communicate with folks and just say, hey, how are you doing? Are you able to manage? What are you feeling okay? Things like that. I think the feedback on the way I've been handling it, that I have heard from others secondhand, is that I have inquired and I have been communicative, and I don't know that others and perhaps my colleagues, I don't want to speak for them, but I think I have a different style. And so it's just a bit of compassion, a bit of sympathy, understanding that, hey, you may not be able to work 9 to 5 right now because you're also trying to make sure that your 6-year-old is doing their online schooling, and having a bit of understanding and flexibility. There's a different skill set that we might bring. So there's not only the skill set, but again, the different experiences, the analogies that you can bring to the table from all of the experiences that you have had in your life will make a project and a workspace much more productive, and I think more robust. And so I tell folks, there's something that we can learn from everybody that we interact with, regardless of what the context is of that interaction. And so as you bring more of those different types of experiences in, it makes for a more fruitful discussion and probably a more robust outcome. And so not just diversity of appearance, more importantly, diversity of thought.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. I saw a comment that my staff filters through the questions and tells me, here's a good one to ask. But I also see most of the questions that come in. And one question my staff did not give to me was from a person that said, oh God, are we going to talk about the woman thing again? And I thought, interesting. So there is still a cadre of people that just don't think this is a useful conversation. And I wonder how, you gave your thoughts about why you think it's important. How do we change the mindset? Is it something that leaders need to be doing to get the point across that this is important and that we have to do something about it?
Certainly, yeah. Leaders have to. It would be great if it starts from the top. I can tell you right now that let's see, I believe of my colleagues, I'm the only female that's reporting to my boss at the moment, and so it's of the assistant secretary. So it is. I notice it. I actually, even when I go to conferences, I take percentages of the number of women that are in the audience. It's just the way that, I've kind of grown up in this industry. Having, even during school, being oftentimes the lone female in classes and things like that. I just think that there's a different set of perspectives that we offer. One thing that is to our detriment, and I'm not telling you anything that you probably haven't heard, is that piece about speaking up. I remember making a presentation on accident tolerant fuel at Westinghouse to a senior executive. And I was so excited about it. And the president had just talked about nuclear energy in his State of the Union speech, and it was great. And I presented, and she wasn't really paying attention. And then it came time for me to be considered for a promotion. And she said, "Oh, well, that person's really quiet." And I thought, "I just presented to you." And so it wasn't even, it was like in a split instance, she made this, she developed an opinion about me. And so I guess the message to folks is that, and it doesn't matter your gender, you have a very small window in which to make an impression. Take advantage of those small windows. They won't come often. And leverage your skills. But again, show up on purpose, which sometimes our gender has been told that we are quiet and perhaps sit along the back wall in meeting rooms and things like that. Participate, show up, sit at the front table. We all have a right to be there. I have in some meetings given out gift cards to the folks that sit in the front row to thank them for, what's funny is in some cases it's because they showed up late, but but nonetheless, show up. Let's be here, be in what we are participating in on purpose.
It's there's been a couple of questions that point to the idea that you have been much more communicative than perhaps the DOE has been in this area in the past, more visible, more accessible. And so people are applauding that. Actually, I have a vote for you to be Secretary of Energy, so don't tell your boss that. And the question that I see someone is asking is that is there something that you can do to also not just be communicating within the U.S. as much, but more internationally? And I think the second part of the question is, how important do you think international collaboration is to accelerating innovation in the nuclear area?
So let me start with the second part first. I think it's extremely important. Again, there's that diversity of thought, right? But there is some consistency. The physics are the physics. And so it's good to share where we can, but then also to understand what different countries' needs are, help them with talent development if that's something that they need, some assistance with. And I have been, prior to mid-March, I had been traveling quite a bit and meeting not only with government officials around the world, but also students. And the feedback that I got was that the students are certainly very are pursuing nuclear energy and nuclear engineering because they are interested in jobs, but that their home country doesn't necessarily have an opportunity for them. And could they come, for example, to the United States to do a fellowship or a postdoc or internships? And so I think that's especially an area that's easy for collaboration, not just in the United States, but there's certainly, France, Canada, other countries that you can have these types of relationships. Teach students not only in operating power plants, but other areas of the industry in research and development and academia as well. And then let them go back to their home country and either construct that new power plant or develop a new nuclear engineering department at a university to again foster the talent pool that will be coming out of their home country. What was the first part of the question, Bill?
Communications.
So certainly, sure, you can say I'm more communicative. I have at my fingertips at the disposal of my fingertips, some tools that those before me may not have had. And so social media, email, all of that makes it so much easier to communicate. And then the other piece is that while I have been coached on how to communicate, sometimes I veer out of that coach lane and say things like they are, and haven't yet gotten into trouble. I've gotten very, very close. But when I receive information, I would prefer it to be unfiltered. And if it's something that's factual, then tell me the facts. And so I communicate how I want to be communicated with. And so if folks are seeing that, one, I'm very appreciative that it's recognized, but it's because it comes from a place where this is how I want to be treated. And so, and especially now, right? We don't have a lot of information. We don't know when we're going to get back to normal. But to at least say, hey, I understand that, you know, this is a difficult time. We're all going through this in a very, very unique way on our own. My own children, as many, I'm sure if you have children, are doing homeschooling, and we're all in the house together, and it's just different. And so to be able to just talk about that is important, and it takes time. That's the other thing, is that I value communication, and I know it takes time and it takes work, but it's priority for me. And I'm not disparaging anybody else who operates differently. It's just something that's important to me.
When you talked about international collaboration, there's a lot of countries that are interested in nuclear, but there's also a lot of countries that seem to be taking a very opposite view. And you know, from the NEA, we have 33 members, and they have all different types of views about the future of nuclear. What's your read on the global picture? I know your responsibility is really to focus on the U.S., but you do have all these partnerships around the world. Where do you think things are going globally at this point?
It's mixed. It's a mix. I think for the countries that are starting to, that either have or starting to develop those mandates where, you know, it's going to be zero carbon emissions by this year, 2040, 2050, and the recognizing that nuclear has to be part of that mix, I think we're in a good place there. I think other countries that need electricity generation, they need it very quickly, may not look to nuclear because it does take a while to build and construct these plants, even if it's a Gen 3 reactor, for example. So certainly we do want to influence countries and want them to build technology that certainly is proliferation proof and has a good regulatory body in country. There's a lot of collaboration that we can and have started to do and also maintain. There's a lot that has been done before me. Thank you. And so we want to maintain those relationships as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunity globally than that the U.S. can certainly benefit from as well. So there's a lot of work that we need to do too, but I think collaborating and communicating and talking about that is the first step. From what I have heard in my discussions and interactions is that folks look to the United States not only for our technology, but for our trustworthiness and for the fact that we will be in that relationship for a century. This is not something where we will sell you a technology and then leave you on your own. We will work with you to ensure that it is operational for its lifetime.
You know, when we're talking about the future of nuclear, the issue that seems to come up most often, it obviously is nuclear waste. You know, new people talk about nuclear waste a lot, and we've had various activities with governments recently to try to highlight the importance of dealing with the back end of the fuel cycle. Mm-hmm. That seems to be an area where perhaps the discussion about deep geological repositories is kind of reasserted itself. But I'm starting to also see some indication that the discussion about advanced recycling might be coming back to the agenda. Two parts of that. First, what do you think about that? And secondly, do you see this as something that is ripe for international cooperation? Is this an area where, because of the nature of recycling and the concerns that many people have about proliferation, is this something that really lends itself to countries working together? How do you view that going forward?
Second part first, yes, I do think this is an area where there can be plenty of international collaboration. There are entities and countries that already do it. And so there, in my opinion, there may not be a need for us to reinvent the wheel, if you will. There's no need to repeat that capability if there's a capability in a different country, and we can collaborate on getting the used fuel. And let me step back. In my mind, commercial fuel is used fuel. It's once through, still has plenty of life left in it. And so as somebody who has spent nearly my entirety of my career in nuclear fuel, it is, to me, it's devastating that we call it waste when there's plenty of life left in it. But getting back to your question, yes, we can collaborate with entities that currently recycle used fuel and not necessarily have to have our own recycling plant in country. So that's certainly an option that my group is looking at. One of the main drivers for why we're looking at the possibility of recycling is that we want our developers to be able to compete globally with other international competitors on offering nuclear reactor technologies to different countries. And right now, our competition is offering a couple things that we cannot. And one of those is fuel take back. And so to be able to take that fuel back, we have to do something with it. And right now in the United States, we're still discussing interim storage, but I would argue that there's another option that we should also be pursuing, and that is looking at recycling to kind of tackle a couple of things. One is we're taking this resource that's only used 5% and reusing it, so that would be a good thing. A lot of the advanced reactors could benefit from recycled fuel as well. And then in the absence of a permanent repository at the moment, we can take fuel back if we can do something with it. And so recycling is certainly that activity to do something with it and reuse it.
I appreciate that very much. Well, believe it or not, we're almost out of time. And we had many questions for you. So perhaps one thing we can talk about, we'll send you the questions. Maybe you'd like to write some answers to some of them. We can make them available on the website for all the people that didn't have a chance to get a question answered. But I'll close with, I think I have enough time to give you maybe 45 seconds to answer this question, which came up from a few people, which is, someone wrote, they said, apparently you're into cycling. I actually didn't know that. You're into cycling. I guess it's on your home page somewhere. And you have teenage children and you're doing all these things. And the question a couple people ask is, how do you do it? How do you balance all that? How do you make it work? You have 45 seconds.
Okay, so let's start with, there's a joke in my office that I have been in contention for the Bad Mom of the Year award. So I am barely surviving in terms of doing it all. But it's hard. It is not easy. It is certainly far from perfect. But the cycling piece is just, it's making sure that I'm healthy enough to do all of the things and take care of all the people that are in my life. And if I'm not fit, then everything else is going to suffer. Like when we fly, they tell you, in case of emergency, you put your own mask on first. That's sort of how I view it. And so I would advise all of you, take care of yourselves first. Work and home life will then also follow from that robustness that you have on your from yourself. But yeah, it's a challenge, and things fall through the cracks, and we get by.
Well, thank you for that, and I think you've ended with good advice, especially during this time when many people are confined. A little exercise is a good thing. But we will try to get you some questions to answer you can take a look at later. But Rita, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon as we can arrange that. And I'll also close by noting that on May 28th, we will be doing another webinar. And this one will be on how do we encourage more women to enter the nuclear and science and technology field. And we'll have guest speakers, including Dr. Fiona Raymond, Executive Director of the NNL in UK, Adrian Kelby, CEO of the Office of Nuclear Regulation, and Marilyn Cray, President of the American Nuclear Society, among others. So we look forward to having you join us. And once again, thank you for participating. And one last time to Dr. Baranwal, Rita, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we will now close the webinar. Thank you all.